Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to a complete Sparkle guide. Sparkle is the newest limited 5-star character in Honkai Star Rail, a quantum harmony support who gives you massive buffs and a ton of skill points. In today's video, we're going to be covering everything you need to know about Sparkle, including the best ways to build and play her. We're going to cover her best relics, planar ornaments, stats, speed tuning, light cone selection, Eidolons, teams, and advanced tips. Before we begin, however, I want you guys to know that I do stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested. And with that being said, let's get right into it. Alright, so starting things off, what does Sparkle actually do? Well, first of all, Sparkle's talent will straight up increase your max number of skill points by 2, having now a max of 7 instead of 5. Additionally, whenever a skill point is consumed by an ally, all of your allies' damage will be increased by 6%, stacking up to 3 times, with each of these stacks lasting for 2 turns. This makes it to where you'll gain 6 to 18% damage bonus as you consume skill points, with this talent and Sparkle's kit in general having good synergy with characters who consume a lot of skill points, like Imbibitor Lune, Qingchui, or others that we'll touch on in the team section. This damage increase will also be higher with your ultimate, but more on that shortly. For Sparkle's skill, which is one of the main parts of her kit, you will select an ally and then give them a large crit damage buff. This crit damage buff at talent level 10 will be 45% plus 24% of Sparkle's own crit damage, which means that it scales based on how much crit damage your Sparkle has and will typically be a big increase in damage. If that wasn't enough, you will also advance that ally's action forward by 50%. This action advance won't work on herself, but typically you're going to be using this on your DPS character to effectively give them an action right away. While this action advance is not 100% like Bronya's, as long as you know what you're doing, it will effectively always advance the selected character's action enough to where they go right after your Sparkle. Because of this, if you speed tune correctly, this could be an incredibly powerful ability that will allow your DPS character to effectively have as much speed as your Sparkle does for all intents and purposes, allowing them to go right after your Sparkle anytime your Sparkle takes action. For more detail about this and how it actually works, we will cover that in the speed tuning section a bit later in the video, but for now understand that this 50% action advance will almost always allow your DPS character to go right after your Sparkle as long as you know what you're doing, on top of giving them a large crit damage buff, meaning that your skill will be what you typically will be spamming on Sparkle most of the time. It is also worth noting that through a bonus trace, your crit damage boost that the skill will give your target character will last until the start of their next turn, which is very relevant as not only will it buff their damage in their turn, but because they will also stay buffed after their turn ends until their next one starts, this can buff, for example, Jing Yuan's Lightning Lord damage as well, and any other source of damage outside of their turn, which can be very strong. With that in mind, Sparkle also has a trace that gives her basic attack extra energy, making it to where you get the same amount of energy for each basic that you do with each skill, and so using a basic attack doesn't feel as bad on this character, even though using your skill is typically what is most recommended for the buff and action advance. With an energy regeneration rope, 3 casts of either Sparkle's skill or basic attacks, as they each give the same amount of energy, will be enough to get your ultimate back, allowing you to use it every 3 turns. Next up, to talk about Sparkle's ultimate, this is one that will straight up give you 4 skill points, recovering 4 of your team's skill points, and then also granting your allies a buff called Cypher. What Cypher does is increase the damage bonus that you gain from Sparkle's talent as you consume skill points by 10%, lasting for 2 turns after using your ultimate. This makes it to where inside of your ultimate, your damage buff you gain from your talent as you consume skill points will go from being 6 to 18% from 1 to 3 stacks to 16 to 48% damage bonus from 1 to 3 stacks instead. This is therefore a pretty big increase in damage on top of gaining skill points, making your ultimate very nice to use. On top of that, it is not a difficult one to get, as long as you're running an energy regeneration rope, you should be able to get your ultimate back every 3 turns after using 3 skills or even basic attacks, as they give you the same amount of energy, allowing you to consistently use your ult every 3 turns. Also, regarding Sparkle's skill point efficiency, while you typically will be spamming your skill and you will need to use 3 for every ult, this will leave you at a net positive of +1 skill point, as you will lose 3 skill points for 3 skill casts, but gain 4 back when you use your ultimate. With that in mind, you can also gain up to 7 skill points in 3 turns if you use 3 basics and your ultimate, as both your basics and skill will give you the same amount of energy as we saw. While I typically recommend using Sparkle's skill because the buffs it gives you are really big, both the crit and the action advance, being able to basic is also important to know for certain teams, notably with someone like Bronya, or if you just need the skill points more than you need the buff. If that wasn't enough, Sparkle also has another trace giving you a bonus 15% attack to all of your allies. Your quantum allies, Sparkle included, will also gain additional attack, either 5, 15, or 30% attack if you have 1, 2, or 3 quantum allies respectively. The way they use allies here includes Sparkle herself, so not only will she gain a bit of attack, but more crucially, she counts counts towards the attack buff to your other quantum party members as well. So you'll only need 3 quantum teammates if you want to maximize this buff, which I don't think you need to do, but is nice for mono quantum teams or just a team that has 3 quantum units. Sparkle is definitely a character who can incentivize and buff mono quantum teams, but it isn't the only way to play her because of how universal and flexible her buffs are. With that in mind, she definitely enables the playstyle as a strong harmony buffer, but I think she's an incredibly generalistic and strong support, not just for advancing your action forward while also giving you a huge buff to your crit damage and some bonus attack, but also giving you an additional source of damage bonus through her talent and ult and free skill points, making her synergize very well with skill point hungry characters or characters that can make use of a lot of skill points, while also just being good alongside almost anyone given how much damage bonus she can give you, as well as allowing you to run a carry on potentially very low speed given how her action advance works. Sparkle is also a character who will gain crit damage, effect res, and HP through her minor traces, which are all nice to increase her buffs and survivability. For Sparkle's technique, you'll get stealth on all your allies for 20 seconds out of combat, which is nice to explore without getting ambushed, and then when you enter battle, you will recover 3 skill points to your team, and since she increases your cap, this can allow you to start with 6 skill points instead of 3, which can be very nice. Lastly, for Sparkle's trace priority, I typically recommend leveling your skill, as you will be spamming it, and then leveling your ultimate and your talent at around the same priority. Be sure not to neglect your major or even minor traces though, as they do provide you with a lot of bonuses. Alright, now with all that out of the way, I want to talk about speed tuning, Sparkle's action advance, and what you should be looking for, how much speed you want on Sparkle and your carry to actually make her skill line up properly. Well, as we saw, Sparkle's skill is a 50% action advance. This isn't the same as Bronya's 100% action advance. However, in practice, you will allow the character you use your skill on, typically just your DPS, to go immediately after your Sparkle, bringing their turn up to right after yours, effectively allowing them to have the same speed that your Sparkle does. What I mean by this is the following. If your Sparkle is on high speed, for example 160, and your DPS is on low speed, because of the way action value works in this game, provided your Sparkle is faster than your DPS character and isn't over double their speed, although in practice that shouldn't matter too much, but I digress, you will bring your DPS's character's action all the way up to right after your Sparkles, effectively not caring about how much speed they have and acting as though they have the same speed as your Sparkle. If your Sparkle has 160.1 speed, which allows her to go 4 times in the first 2 cycles of the Memory of Chaos, 2 actions for each of the first 2 cycles, then your DPS character, who could be building 0 speed, will also be able to go those 4 times in the first 2 cycles, 2 times per cycle, giving them more actions and effectively going as often as your Sparkle is, provided you use her skill on them. Because of this, building your Sparkle fast and allowing her to go as often as possible will allow your DPS to in turn also go as fast as your Sparkle, while additionally allowing them to focus on their damage and no longer need speed or speed boots. While there are other ways to do this, and going fast Sparkle is what I typically recommend, you can also go for another playstyle of just giving your Sparkle 1 less speed than your DPS character. This would allow your DPS to go, and then right after your Sparkle will go, bringing your DPS back up and allowing them to go again, kind of similar to how most people use Bronya. While this can work, for example, if you give your DPS over 134 speed and then your Sparkle 134, allowing you to get 2 actions in the first cycle of the Memory of Chaos, being especially good if you are high investment and can clear in 1 cycle. Generally speaking though, going for a fast Sparkle is the best way to go about building her for most people in most situations. Going for a fast Sparkle gives you so many advantages, like neglecting speed on your DPS character and also getting more actions per cycle depending on how much speed you have. As far as speed tuning and speed math goes, generally for the exact speed you're looking for, it varies based on the content you're doing, but as I said, aiming for 160.1 as your goal and a good amount of speed to get on your Sparkle is what I recommend. You can get more, like 171 or more, as speed generally is just good to get, and there are different speed breakpoints where you'll get more turns per cycle in the Memory of Chaos. Generally, setting a realistic and pretty high speed goal of 160 is what I will recommend to most players, but as I said, even getting more than that can be beneficial, and if you don't quite have that much yet, then it's no big deal. You can work your way there and still be efficient. To keep things simple, build as much speed as you're looking for, typically 160.1 or more. Speed is generally good, and then you can look for other stats like crit damage and others that we'll cover in the coming section. As far as slow Sparkle goes, if you choose to play it, I still recommend going like a 134 speed Sparkle and then investing the rest of your stats into crit damage primarily, but I typically don't recommend a slow Sparkle as much, with there being some exceptions, like notably if you're playing a really fast carry. This can be the case with someone who's naturally fast like Sealy, who not only has a base speed of 115, but also gets a bonus 20% speed through her skill, making it to where your Sealy Sealy will be naturally very fast, and so increasing her speed, bringing her up to Sparkle speed if your Sparkle is faster, effectively making her maybe 10, 20, or 30 speed faster, will not be as efficient as it is for a fast Sparkle to bring up a slow DPS to her speed. And so at that point, you can run a slower Sparkle who will still typically have some speed stats, but will be slower than your really fast carry like Sealy. With that in mind, to keep things simple, while you can either play a fast or slow Sparkle, I generally recommend playing her fast, building 160.1 or more speed, depending on what you need, and going from there, allowing you to bring up your slow DPS to her speed, as well as giving them a lot of buffs, provided your Sparkle isn't over twice their speed and isn't slower than them. All right, now with all that out of the way, let's get into how to actually build your Sparkle. For your Relic sets, I want to start by saying that it's actually very easy and straightforward. In fact, your best set is typically going to be the 4-piece Hackerspace. This will give you 6% speed on the 2-piece and then 12% speed to all of your allies when you use your ultimate if you do have the 4-piece equipped. As it stands, there aren't that many good supportive Relic sets in the game, which is why a 4-piece like this is the typical go-to for support characters like Sparkle. With that in mind, mix and matching 2-pieces is a very viable alternative if you just want more stats. Because of this, I either recommend going for the 4-piece Hackerspace or 2-piece Hackerspace for some speed alongside another 2-piece that will give you defensive utility, like the 2-piece Longavows for some HP or the 2-piece of the Guard of Weathering Snow for some damage reduction. I also want to mention that the Wind set can potentially be your best in slot, a strong option if you can make use of the advance forward after using your ultimate. With that in mind, it is a bit more niche in the sense that you have to make sure it's not messing up your turn order and you're using your ultimate at the correct time, but it can work and it can synergize well with other action advances like the Dance 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 Light Cone, so keep that in mind, with the general option typically being Hackerspace for most players. Moving on for your Planar ornaments, once again, it's pretty straightforward. The Broken Keel will be your go-to as it will increase all of your allies' crit damage by 10%, being not only useful for Sparkle, but also for your whole team's damage, crit damage being a great stat to have. On top of that, you also gain 10% effect res, which is a pretty useful stat for a support character like Sparkle, and while you need 30% effect res or more for this crit damage buff to actually work, Sparkle does get some effect res through her minor traces, so this really should not be an issue. For all these reasons, Broken Keel is what I typically recommend as your standard go-to for Sparkle for some free crit damage. Now, with that in mind, there are very viable alternatives. The 2-piece Fleet of the Ageless can be nice to give your team attack and give your Sparkle some max HP, which can help make her tankier and once again be a viable supportive option. Regarding the Penacony Land of Dreams Planar ornament, this one is nice in a mono quantum team, giving all your other quantum party members a 10% damage increase, which obviously is nice in mono quantum teams. The one thing you need to keep in mind though is that for Planar ornaments that give you energy like Penacony or Von Whack, you don't actually really need this energy because Sparkle will be getting her ultimate every 3 turns, regardless of if you're using skills or basics. After you use 3 of either of them, you will have your ultimate ready, provided you're running an energy regeneration rope, which means that this extra energy you're gaining isn't as necessary as it is on other characters. With that in mind, the damage increase to your quantum allies is still pretty nice, making it a good option for mono quantum teams. The only time I would consider Von Whack is if you only care about zero cycling with Dance Dance Dance, but more on that in a future video. Whereas your general best in slot will be the Broken Keel, with Fleet of the Ageless also being viable. Now for the stats you're looking for on Sparkle, once again, it is quite straightforward. First of all, you want to make sure you have enough speed for whatever you're going for. Speed is great on Sparkle for the reasons I mentioned earlier, letting your DPS character build more damage, go for an attack or HP boot, while your Sparkle is the character going fast and advancing your action forward. Because of this and the reasons I mentioned earlier, a fast Sparkle is what I typically recommend, and so going for at least 160, but even potentially more speed is a good idea and one of the main stats you're looking for. Alongside speed, crit damage is also very good, as this is what your buff scales on, so having more crit damage is always great. Outside of speed and crit damage, defensive stats like HP percent or defense percent can help make your Sparkle tankier and avoid getting one-shotted randomly, and some effect res can be nice to have as well. An important thing I want to mention though regarding Sparkle's crit damage is that while it's definitely good to build crit damage, something you should absolutely be looking for, losing out on a bit of it won't make your buff that much worse. It scales on 30% of your Sparkle's crit damage, and so while crit damage is important, if you have to lose out on a bit of it in order to either make her a bit faster or a bit tankier so you're not randomly dying to the harder Memory of Chaos floors, that can be an efficient thing to do if you are struggling with that content. Overall though, to maximize your buffing, crit damage is the main stat you're looking for, alongside speed, building however much speed you're looking for on your Sparkle, referring to the speed tuning section earlier in this video for more information about my thoughts on how much speed you should be looking for. But overall, either going for a fast 160 plus speed Sparkle, which is what I recommend, or being 1 speed under your DPS if you want to put them on 135 and your Sparkle on 134, for example, which is another playstyle, but generally I recommend building speed on your Sparkle. Because of this, for the stats you're looking for, you're going to go for crit damage on your body, speed on your boots, either HP percent or defense percent on your sphere, and then absolutely an energy regeneration rope. Getting an ERR rope, as I mentioned earlier, is what will allow you to actually get a 3-turn ultimate, and so make sure you have this to get better uptime on your ult, being very important for your Sparkle. Overall, I really recommend an ERR rope. Outside of that, look for speed, crit damage, and making your Sparkle tankier. Now, with that out of the way, for Sparkle's Lycones, there are quite a few options. First of all, her signature Lycone, Early Escapade, or Escapade, I don't know, gives a ton of stats. Not only do you get 32% crit damage for your Sparkle, but you'll also get an effect when you enter battle called Mask that will give your allies 10% crit rate and 28% crit damage, which is a ton of stats. This Mask effect will last for 3 turns, but you will also gain it again once you successfully recover 4 skill points. This can be done through basic attacking or just using your ultimate, which you will be typically doing every 3 turns on Sparkle anyways. And since it's an ability that will generate skill points for you, it will synergize well with this Lycone's effect, allowing you to always give your team 10% crit rate and 28% crit damage on top of the bonus crit damage that it gives to your Sparkle, making this overall a really solid Harmony Lycone that synergizes very well with Sparkle's kit. This Lycone gives your other party members over 40 crit value. It's genuinely a lot of buffs to both your crit rate and crit damage, making it a really strong supportive option and definitely Sparkle's best in slot. While you shouldn't feel forced to pull for a Lycone, I think this is definitely a good one and a very strong one if you choose to pull for it. If you don't get it, however, there are alternatives. But the battle isn't over. Bronia's Lycone that you can get from the shop, as it can give you additional skill points and energy, and even if you don't need those, giving your ally that takes action after the wearer 30% more damage is a really nice passive to have, provided you use your skill on your DPS and they go right after you, and you can actually make use of this Lycone's effect, which should be the case given what we talked about earlier and how your action advance works. For the 4-star options you can go for, Dance 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 is a great option overall, advancing all your allies' action forward by 16 to 24% depending on superimposition level. Carve the Moons can be decent for just bonus stats to your team, either attack percent, crit damage, or energy regeneration, and free-to-play Lycones can perform similarly as well, being notably Past and Future, which will similarly to Bronia's Lycone give the next character to take action after your skill more damage bonus, or the Dreamville Adventure, the new Penacony Lycone, which increases the damage of your allies for whatever type of ability you used on your Sparkle, which will typically either be more skill damage or more ultimate damage, which can be more or less relevant based on your team and what synergies you'll have with this Lycone buff. Lastly, if you're playing a mono quantum team, then the Planetary Rendezvous can be good as well for 12 to 24% more damage bonus to your quantum allies. Now, while I want to re-emphasize that Sparkle's signature Lycone does give you a ton of stats, like genuinely a lot of crit value to your entire team, the other options are really good, and if it's up to me, I typically like to choose a Lycone that will buff the next character taking action, like either Bronia's or Past and Future, a great free-to-play option. But keep in mind that with these Lycones, they only really work consistently if you're playing a fast Sparkle or if you're speed tuning correctly and are like super slow. But generally, this works with a fast Sparkle, as you're going to ensure that your DPS always goes right after you use your skill on Sparkle. If you aren't speed tuning properly or are slower, there's the chance that you action advance your DPS by 50% and they don't go immediately after, and then one of your other allies goes before them, and then you lose out on this damage buff. Typically though, since I do recommend playing a fast Sparkle anyways, and you can work around this, a damage buffing Lycone is something that I really like, but also other ones like Planetary Rendezvous for Quantum or Dance Dance Dance, if you're making use of the action advance correctly, are very viable and strong options, with Carve the Moon and Dreamville Adventure being good too. Alright, now moving on, for Sparkle's Eidolons, she actually has some really good early ones. First of all, Sparkle's E1 will increase the duration of your Cypher effect applied by your ultimate from 2 turns to 3. This will make its uptime a lot more consistent, as you will be ulting every 3 turns typically. On top of that, you will also give all of your allies 40% attack as they are affected by Cypher. This is huge and a pretty big upgrade to your damage, provided you are running attack scaling characters, making it a honestly pretty strong stepping stone that also gets you one step closer to your E2, which is also pretty strong. Sparkle's E2 allows allies to ignore up to 24% of enemies' defense, 8% per stack of your talent, stacking up to 3 times for a total of 24%, which is huge, and the more defense ignore you have, the better it is, so this synergizes inherently very nicely with someone like Silverwolf or Pila, who you'll oftentimes be running in your team anyways. Because of this, Defense Shred is very good, especially when paired not just with those characters, but also with all of the damage buffs Sparkle will be giving you, making this a very strong Eidolon for your team's damage. Moving on, your E3 and 5 will increase your trace levels, and your E4 will give you an additional skill point from your ultimate, as well as giving you 1 more max skill point, going from 7 to 8. In my opinion, this this isn't the most needed, but an extra skill point per ult can help out if your team is extremely skill point hungry. Lastly, for Sparkle's E6, your crit damage buff from your skill will now affect all of your allies provided they're affected by Cypher, which should be always after you use your ultimate, and it will also give more crit damage based on how much your Sparkle has. Overall, this Eidolon's really good for buffing multiple characters. If you're running a dual carry comp, for example, buffing both of them with crit damage is very relevant, whereas outside of that, it's just a bit more crit damage and not the most important Eidolon. It is definitely strong, but overall, I think her E1 and E2 are pretty insane and strong stopping points if you plan on getting early Eidolons, whereas if not, Sparkle is definitely a very strong character at E0. Lastly, if you're wondering whether to choose her E1 or her S1, I think this depends on you and what other Lycons you have, but typically for your team overall, E1 will be a bit of a bigger increase given the attack percent, better uptime on your ult, and being able to run another Lycon, assuming you already have one. If you don't have one though, or just want the signature Lycon, it can also be more valuable if you want to have a good Harmony Lycon that you can potentially use on another Harmony unit like Hanya, although it is a bit niche and the uptime can be wonky on some other Harmony characters, but giving your team crit rate and crit damage still makes it a strong signature Lycon. Overall though, I personally would pick E1, which also gets you a step closer to your second Eidolon, an incredibly strong defense ignore. Now, as far as Sparkle's teams go, the sky really is the limit. First of all, there are a lot of characters that Sparkle synergize very well with, not just because they can use her buffs, but also the extra skill points she generates. These characters that have particular synergy with her include characters like Dan Heng, Imbiber Lune, or Ching Shui, who can use a lot of skill points every turn, maximizing Sparkle's buffs and making use of the skill points you're giving them. These are characters that really like Sparkle and can make use of her entire kit. Additionally, for someone like Ching Shui or even Sealy, quantum DPSs can also gain additional bonuses through the Planetary Rendezvous Lycon, the attack buff based on your quantum party members that Sparkle has in her kit, alongside maybe even the Penacony set, and the overall synergies of a mono quantum team. While I don't think you should feel forced to force a mono quantum team, I really think people tend to overhype wanting to play this team comp. It definitely can work against either enemies that have a quantum weakness, or if you can reliably implant it with Silverwolf, as you can run a DPS like either Sealy or Ching Shui, Sparkle as a buffing support, Silverwolf as a debuffer, and Fuchuan or Lynx as your sustain. And Shuyi can also work as a DPS if you want. Keep in mind though that my personal opinion is that while yes, you can go for 4 quantums, first of all, the Nocturne passive only requires 3 characters because Sparkle is included for the max attack buff, and second of all, I think having a flexible slot here where you can use either a healer or support character or even DPS based on what your enemies are weak to, and can still force a quantum implant if, for example, the enemies are weak to ice and you're running an ice support like Ron Mei, so you don't actually need 4 quantums, but keep in mind that this is a viable and strong archetype. Outside of that, basically any carry can work, provided they can use your crit damage buffs, ideally attack percent as well, and value the extra skill points. Jinyuan has good synergy with Sparkle because of Lightning Lord also making use of the buffs that she gives you, and for certain characters who might not be very skill point hungry, like for example Blade, you can also do something like running even Bronya and Sparkle together here, and actually be able to use a lot of the skill points you're getting through your Bronya and Sparkle, and then have a healer to generate some, and Blade to just get buffed and do damage. For a team like this though, if you do choose to run Sparkle and Bronya together, you will have to do a lot of speed tuning to make sure your buffs line up and your team order is okay, but it shouldn't be that complicated. This is something you will have to test around with though. Because of the skill points you're generating, you can also do some double DPS teams, and additionally, I think she synergizes well with almost any DPS character, as I mentioned, provided they can use her buffs and actually scale off of crit. So maybe not for dot characters, as they value more attack and damage bonus, but outside of that, in general, more turns, skill points, and damage is very universal. As far as the team comp goes, you typically want to be building a DPS character alongside Sparkle, and then a flexible buffer or debuffer, and a healer or shielder. Your healer or shielder will be someone like Luotra, Huohuo, Fuchuan, Lynx, Japard, Natasha, or just whoever, and then your buffer or debuffer will either be any strong Harmony buffer, like almost any one of them, but my favorites being Ting Yun for a ton of attack and energy, or Ron Mei because she's absolutely broken, or a debuffer like Pella or Silverwolf can all help increase your team's damage. Using a support that can use the bonus skill points you gain if your team comp has extra skill points will obviously make more value out of Sparkle's kit though, so keep that in mind. Regarding Bronya, as I mentioned earlier, she can work, but it will require more testing and speed tuning to make sure your turn order lines up. In theory, you should be able to action advance your DPS with Sparkle and then also advance them with your Bronya, but you have to make sure you not only have enough skill points, but also have a functioning team order and can make use of your buffs, so test that out if it's something you're interested in. As I said though, so many carries can synergize with Sparkle, I can't even name them all, as I'd be naming basically every DPS that scales on crit. Any character whose follow-up attacks can be buffed outside of their turn, well, Sparkle will do that for them. Characters or teams that need a lot of skill points, or just carries in general can make use of Sparkle, with the biggest winners in my opinion being skill point hungry characters like Imbibitor Lune and Qingchui, quantum DPSs like Sealy, or follow-up attackers like Jing Yuan, Clara, Himiko, or even Topaz. Really so much you can do and so many amazing characters that can get buffed with Sparkle. And so yeah, overall Sparkle is a really strong support, genuinely a very powerful one. I don't want anyone to feel forced to get her. There's a lot of good harmony options or other buffers or debuffers in general, but especially if you can make use of the skill points she gives you and all the buffs as well as the action advance, she is a really strong support for so many teams. I hope this guide was helpful. As always, if there's anything I want to add, it will be in a pinned comment because she is new, so there may be some new things that are discovered. Oh, and also since I recorded the team section, I found that the Brawniest Sparkle team I played actually worked really well, so that's cool. Overall, I hope the guide was helpful. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.